The rain had not yet started, but the scent of wet earth and old would already fill the air when Samantha Hartley stood in the doorway of her newly purchased mansion in the Connecticut countryside. The structure loomed with the kind of silent authority only a century-old estate could possess. Gothic lines, ivy-strangled balconies, and windows that looked like they had seen too much. For Samantha, it was supposed to be a fresh start, after a public divorce that left her more emotionally exhausted than financially wounded. She had chosen seclusion over city life. She didn't need noise. She didn't need pity. She needed peace, and she hoped this house would grant it. The move-in was uneventful until Samantha realized the property was far too large to maintain alone. With 10 bedrooms, multiple parlors, and a sprawling library, the mansion demanded more than occasional dusting. Her online listing was simple and direct. Live-in housekeeper needed. Experience required. Discretion essential. Dozens applied, but one name stood out, Eleanor Brooks. Her resume was impeccable. Years of domestic service for prominent families, spotless references, and most of all, she lived nearby. When Eleanor arrived, Samantha expected someone frail, maybe even forgetful. Instead, she met a woman of 74 who moved with quiet grace, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun, her presence both unassuming and oddly commanding. She wore a pale blue cardigan, carried no luggage but a single leather handbag, and smiled as though she had been waiting for this moment far longer than Samantha had anticipated. "Miss Hartley," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Thank you for having me." Samantha, despite herself, felt oddly comforted. "Please call me Samantha." From the first day, Eleanor made herself useful without overstepping. She never hovered. She was meticulous, efficient, and respectful of space. Samantha found herself surprisingly at ease with the arrangement, until she noticed something peculiar. Eleanor was particular about where she cleaned. She left the guest rooms untouched unless told otherwise, avoided the attic entirely, and seemed to have an almost obsessive attachment to the library. She dusted and organized the bookshelves herself every morning, never letting the younger helper Samantha had briefly hired even enter the room. Most days, Eleanor would close the door behind her and stay inside for hours, emerging only when the grandfather clock in the hallway struck noon. At first, Samantha thought little of it. Maybe the woman simply enjoyed literature. But one afternoon, needing to grab a book for an old college paper she wanted to revisit, Samantha opened the library door without knocking. She found Eleanor standing in front of a far shelf, her hand hovering just inches from an old sepia-toned photograph. Her eyes, however, weren't looking at the books. They were fixed on the image. Samantha stepped in. "Eleanor?" The older woman startled slightly, then dropped her hand and turned. "Oh, I didn't hear you. I was just looking for a copy of Whitman." Eleanor nodded and gestured vaguely toward the east shelf. "Top row, right side. Third book from the edge." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. Samantha glanced at the photograph before Eleanor subtly moved to block it. It showed 3 teenagers standing in front of the same mansion, though the photo was clearly taken decades earlier. The tallest, a young man with a Letterman jacket, had his arm around a girl with a wide-brimmed hat. The third person was a young woman, slender, with bright eyes and a calm smile. She looked hauntingly familiar. "Do you know them?" Samantha asked. Eleanor didn't miss a beat. Many faces look familiar in places like this. Memory plays tricks, especially in old houses. Before Samantha could ask anything else, Eleanor stepped aside and gently closed the glass cabinet door where the photo sat, almost reverently. That night, Samantha couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls of the mansion, listening to the creaks and groans of structures shaped by generations. She found herself drawn back to the library, lit only by the hallway sconces. Standing in front of the cabinet, she stared at the photograph. The girl on the right, was it Eleanor? A younger version of her, perhaps 15 or 16. The resemblance was too strong to ignore. The next morning, Eleanor behaved as if nothing had happened. She greeted Samantha with tea, set the table for breakfast, and returned to her routine. But the memory of her gaze, that unguarded, almost sorrowful expression, lingered in Samantha's mind like smoke that refused to dissipate. As the days passed, Samantha started noticing other things. Eleanor always paused when passing the second-floor hallway, her eyes momentarily drawn to a closed door at the end. She once told Samantha that the West Wing didn't need to be cleaned. Not yet. And whenever Samantha asked questions about the mansion's history, Eleanor always redirected. "You should ask the town archive," she would say. "They keep better records than memory does." But Samantha no longer believed that Eleanor's presence in the house was coincidental. There was a connection, unspoken but undeniable. The way she walked the halls, as if she had walked them before. The way she touched the wooden banister, like one with a long-lost friend. Even the way she addressed certain rooms with quiet reverence, like visiting a grave. One evening, as dusk painted the windows with soft oranges and purples, Samantha watched from the upstairs landing as Eleanor stood in the garden, facing the house. She wasn't gardening. She wasn't resting. She was simply staring at the house, at the library window, at something only she could see. Samantha knew then. Eleanor had not come to work. She had come to remember, and perhaps to be remembered. The town hall of West Haven was a modest brick building tucked between a defunct post office and a faded general store. Samantha had passed it a dozen times without ever paying attention, but now, after days of questions left hanging in the air of her home, she found herself standing before its door, a folded printout of the old photograph clutched tightly in her coat pocket. She had scanned and enlarged the image, hoping for some detail that might confirm what her instincts already screamed, that the girl in the picture was Eleanor Brooks. But more than that, she wanted to know why that photograph had been tucked away in her library, and why Eleanor seemed both drawn to it and haunted by it. Inside, the town clerk, a woman named Ruth, was helpful enough once Samantha explained she was researching the history of her property. Ruth retrieved a few boxes of property records, some yellowing newspaper clippings, and a brittle map showing the town's original plots. Samantha sifted through them, careful and quiet, until a page caught her attention. A property transfer document from 1972. The mansion had been sold by the Brooks family that year to a private buyer who later lost the house to the bank. But what made Samantha's stomach turn was not the name on the deed. It was the realization that the previous owners were indeed the Brooks family. Eleanor's last name. The timing aligned with what little she knew. Eleanor would have been in her 20s then. But why had she returned? Why apply for a position as a maid in a house that once belonged to her own family? Back home, Samantha said nothing at first. She observed. She noted how Eleanor still spent her mornings in the library, how she continued to avoid the West Wing, and most curiously, how she seemed to become more alert at night, as though listening for sounds Samantha could not hear. 3 nights after her visit to the town archives, Samantha was awoken by a faint creaking. It wasn't unusual for the house to groan under its own weight, but this was rhythmic. Steady steps, soft and careful. She got up, pulled a sweater around her shoulders, and followed the sound, down the hallway, past the guest rooms, until she reached the end of the corridor near the back stairs. A door was ajar, the one that had always been locked since she moved in. When she pushed it open, her breath caught. The room inside had been completely cleaned. The dust was gone. The curtains drawn. A vase with fresh flowers stood on the side table. The bed was made, and the shelves were neatly arranged with books and framed pictures, none of which belonged to Samantha. This was no guest room. This had been lived in. Recently, Samantha turned on the lamp near the bed and froze when her eyes landed on a photograph in a silver frame. It was another version of the picture from the library, but this time, the girl stood alone in front of the mansion, her hand raised in a hesitant wave. The back of the photo read, Margaret, Spring 1965. She heard the floorboard creak behind her and turned sharply. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't be in here. I could say the same to you, Samantha replied, forcing calm into her voice. What is this room? Eleanor stepped inside, slowly, and for a moment looked like she might lie, but then her shoulders sagged. This was Margaret's room, she said quietly. Samantha felt her heart lurch. Who was she? Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, as if the answer carried too much weight to speak, while standing. Margaret Brooks. youngest daughter of the family. She disappeared in the summer of 1965. No one ever found her. Samantha sat beside her, the silence between them thick with unsaid things. And you? You're a Brooks, too. Eleanor nodded. Cousin. My mother was the sister of Margaret's father. We weren't close, not in the traditional sense. But I spent many summers here when we were children. Later, I returned as a caretaker when Margaret's mother took ill. I was 17 then. Margaret was 16. And the photo in the library? Samantha asked. She loved that picture. Said it captured the only day she felt truly happy here. Samantha hesitated. Do you think she ran away? Eleanor didn't answer at first. Instead, she rose and walked to the window, pushing the curtain aside. They said she must have, that she packed a small bag and left. But Margaret wasn't reckless. She was smart, careful. She never would have gone without telling someone. Someone like you. Eleanor nodded slowly, her eyes distant. She told me things. Secrets. Fears. I was young, too young to understand the burden she carried. And then one day, she was gone, just like that. Samantha watched her, trying to read between the words. Did you ever look for her? I wrote letters to every address I could find, called people, drove to nearby towns. But my name meant nothing after the scandal. They dismissed me as unstable, emotional, even dangerous. What scandal? But Eleanor only shook her head. Another time, that night, after Eleanor retreated to her quarters, Samantha returned to the library. She examined the photograph again, this time noticing something she hadn't before. Behind a group of teenagers, partially obscured by a curtain in the window, was a shadowy figure, barely visible, but unmistakably human. Someone had been watching from inside the house. The following day, Samantha took the photograph to a photo restoration expert in New Haven. She asked him to enhance the background without altering the image. It took hours, but when he finally revealed a clearer version, Samantha felt the blood drain from her face. The figure in the window was not just watching. It was a woman, and though the image was grainy, her resemblance to Eleanor was undeniable. When Samantha returned home, Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing tea. She didn't look up when Samantha entered. There was a stillness to her, like someone preparing for a storm they knew they could not outrun. You were in the photo, Samantha said, placing the enhanced image on the table. Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, I told her to run. I told her not to wait. And she didn't. Samantha's chest tightened. Wait for what? But again, Eleanor didn't answer. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently, as if the truth had disturbed something long asleep. Doors creaked open without cause. A lamp flickered despite a new bulb. Samantha didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in trauma, in memory. And she knew this house, and the woman who now walked its halls carried both. It had been raining for 2 days straight when Samantha found herself drawn to the attic, a part of the house she had avoided until now. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she ascended. Each step met with a musty scent of old fabric and forgotten furniture. Eleanor was downstairs, making soup, and Samantha knew she had little time. The attic door had always been locked, but last night it was ajar, perhaps by mistake, or perhaps Eleanor no longer cared to keep it closed. Either way, the opportunity was there, and Samantha's curiosity had long since passed the point of caution. Inside, the space was cluttered with trunks, broken lamps, and furniture draped in white sheets. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the faint smell of mothballs lingered in the air. Near the far end of the room, under a slanted beam, Samantha noticed a wooden chest different from the others. Polished, carefully sealed, and covered not in dust, but in a clean linen cloth. She pulled it open slowly, half expecting mice or worse. Instead, she found a collection of belongings wrapped in tissue paper, clothes, a worn pair of ballet shoes, letters tied in a ribbon, and at the very bottom, a small leather-bound diary with the name Margaret pressed into the cover. Samantha sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the book. The pages were aged but still legible, filled with looping handwriting and smudged ink. The early entries were typical of a teenage girl. Notes about school, dresses her sisters, and frustration with her overbearing mother. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. Margaret wrote of loneliness, secrets, and above all of Eleanor, though not with resentment, but admiration. Only Eleanor listens. One entry read, "Only she sees the truth and dares to say out loud. She says the house is sick with silence, and I believe her. Something's wrong here. Something's always been wrong." Further along, the entries grew darker. Mother says I imagined things. But I know what I saw. The night of the fire, I saw Father dragging something through the garden. Eleanor was gone by then. I don't think she knows. Or maybe she does. Maybe that's why they made her leave. Another passage, dated June of 1965, struck like a dagger. They made her take the blame. I heard them. I was outside the study. They needed a scapegoat, someone to protect the Brooks name. Father said it was just a broken arm, that no one would remember. But I remember. And Eleanor, she didn't fight back. She just left. Samantha's hands trembled as she turned the final pages. There was no closure, only fragments. Plans to leave, a mention of a bus ticket, a promise to write. The last sentence was brief and chilling. If I don't come back, someone must tell the truth. Eleanor didn't hurt anyone. She saved me. Downstairs, the soup had gone cold. Samantha didn't notice how long she had been in the attic until Eleanor knocked gently on her bedroom door that evening, holding a tray with untouched tea. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was calm. "You've been quiet today." Samantha didn't answer immediately. She studied Eleanor. Tried to imagine the younger woman Margaret described. The one who bore shame that wasn't hers. The one who left silently to protect a name that had never protected her. "I found her diary," Samantha said. Eleanor's face remained still, but something shifted in her eyes. Not surprise, not even fear, just a tired acceptance. "I thought it was lost," she said softly, setting the tray down. "She trusted you," Samantha continued. "She knew you didn't hurt that boy." Eleanor sat slowly at the edge of the bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain pressed gently against the windows like an echo of the past trying to return. "I was 17, Eleanor began, her voice distant. Too young to argue with grown men in suits. Too naive to understand what was happening around me. There was a party that night. Politicians, donors, all the people the Brooks family needed to impress. Margaret's brother, Thomas, was playing in the hallway and fell down the stairs. It was an accident, but his arm snapped badly and the commotion disrupted everything. Margaret's father couldn't bear the embarrassment. He said it had to be someone's fault. They blamed you. Eleanor nodded. Margaret tried to speak up, but she was just a girl, and I told her to stay silent. I thought I was protecting her. The scandal would have destroyed them. They said if I took the blame, I'd be quietly let go and given a recommendation. But instead, they called me unstable, dangerous. They made it look like I had pushed him. Samantha leaned forward. And Margaret? What happened to her? Eleanor's voice broke for the first time. She was going to run away. She said she'd find a way to fix it. She promised me she'd clear my name. Then one day, she was gone. The police searched, but nothing turned up. Her mother said Margaret had always been dramatic. Her father claimed she had a boy in town. They wanted to forget her, so they did. But you never forgot. Eleanor smiled faintly. No, I came back every few years, just to look at the house, to remember. But it wasn't until you posted the ad that I felt called, like maybe this was the end of something, or the beginning. That night, Samantha sat alone in the library with Margaret's diary and the photograph. She now understood why Eleanor watched the house from the garden, why she cleaned Margaret's room, why she stayed quiet. Eleanor wasn't hiding guilt. She was guarding memory, trying to keep something sacred alive in a place where so much had been buried. The next morning, Samantha went to the town's historical archive, determined to dig deeper. In the back room, she found a microfilm reel of a newspaper from July 1965. A short article confirmed the missing girl report. Margaret Brooks, 16, believed to have run away. No follow-up, no search team mentioned, no interview with Eleanor. But what stood out was something else entirely. A brief police report attached to the same date. A neighbor had reported seeing someone leaving the Brooks house late at night, carrying a suitcase, alone. The description matched Margaret, but the file had a red stamp across it. No further action. Case closed. As she drove back to the mansion, Samantha knew one thing with certainty. This story wasn't finished. The truth hadn't just been buried. It had been silenced. And now, with the pieces in her hands, she felt the weight of it, not just for Eleanor, but for Margaret too. The morning broke clear for first time in nearly a week, and sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the upstairs corridor like a spotlight upon old truths too long left in shadow. Samantha stood at the bottom of the staircase, clutching the thin envelope she found tucked behind the last pages of Margaret's diary. An envelope yellow with age, sealed but never opened. Her hands had trembled when she discovered it. The handwriting on the front, delicate and unmistakably feminine, simply read, "To Eleanor, if I am gone." She hadn't opened it immediately. Something about the letter felt sacred, as though even touching it was a trespass. But now, seated across from Eleanor in the sunroom, the envelope rested between them like an old wound reopened. Eleanor didn't reach for it. Her eyes, glassy but calm, remained fixed on Samantha. "I think it was meant for you," Samantha said gently, "but it was never sent. She must have left it behind the day she disappeared." Eleanor slowly reached for the envelope and turned it over in her fingers, as though memorizing the feel of it before she dared to break the seal. Her hands were steady despite the years that had passed. When she opened it and unfolded the thin paper, she read silently, her lips barely moving. Samantha waited, watching the lines of the older woman's face deepen, not from age but from the weight of something long withheld finally coming loose. When Eleanor finished, she held the letter to her chest for a moment and exhaled a breath she had been holding for decades. Her voice, when it came, was softer than usual, but no less clear. "She forgave me. All this time, I thought she left because I failed her, because I didn't protect her. But she says, I was the only one who ever did." Samantha leaned forward. What else did she say? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Then she met Samantha's gaze, and something in her eyes had changed, something unburdened. "She said she left to protect me," Eleanor said, "because she knew that if she exposed what really happened, they would have come for me again, that the Brooks name would survive only if I disappeared with the lie. So she carried it instead." "What did she know, Eleanor?" Samantha asked, her voice low. "What really happened in this house?" Eleanor stood and walked to the window, where the garden had begun to bloom despite the season's slow retreat. Her back to Samantha, she spoke as if to the trees beyond. "There was more than the accident," she said. "Margaret knew things that would have destroyed her father's career. He was running for Congress at the time. Behind closed doors, he was cruel, not just to his children, but to the staff. Margaret walked in on him once. He was striking one of the maids, a girl younger than Margaret. He paid her family to keep quiet, sent her away. Margaret never forgot. She told me she kept records, wrote down names, dates, everything she could." Samantha's heart pounded. Did she hide them somewhere? Eleanor turned. She said she kept them in her music box, the one with the ballerina. It was gone the day after she disappeared. Samantha recalled a box she had seen in the attic chest, beneath the diary and ballet shoes. At the time, she hadn't opened it. It had seemed merely decorative. She ran upstairs and retrieved it, bringing it down carefully. When she opened the lid, the box played a brittle, high-pitched lullaby. Inside, where the dancer spun, there was a false bottom. She pried it open. What lay beneath was a folded bundle of papers, still intact, protected by the wood. There were names, wealthy donors, politicians, dates, brief account of behavior that ranged from coercion to outright assault. It was a damning archive. At the bottom was a sheet with Margaret's careful handwriting. "If this is found, I am gone. Please protect Eleanor. She did nothing wrong." Samantha looked up at Eleanor, who who now sat in the armchair, eyes closed, as if hearing the music from the box brought everything rushing back. "Do you want to go to the police with this?" Samantha asked. Eleanor opened her eyes. "They won't do anything. The people named here are either dead or untouchable." Margaret knew that. That's why she ran. She wasn't trying to bring them down. She was trying to disappear with the truth before it destroyed us both. Samantha nodded, but her thoughts were racing. Then why come back now? Eleanor gave a faint smile. "Because I never stopped waiting. Not for justice. For peace. I came back because this house held our last moments. I thought if I stayed long enough, if I cared for it like I used to care for her, maybe I'd understand. Maybe I'd know if she survived." Samantha sat beside her. "And now..." Eleanor looked at the letter once more. "Now I know she did. She lived. She even changed her name. She mentions it here, briefly. Said she married. Had a child. She never said where she went, only that she forgave me. For the first time since Eleanor arrived, she wept. Quietly, not broken, but complete. The tears were not only for Margaret or for what had been lost, but for something found at last. A sense of closure that no time could erase. Samantha stayed with her until night fell. She didn't need to ask more. She didn't press for details. Instead, she helped Eleanor prepare a fire, and the two women sat in the library, surrounded by silence that no longer felt empty, but full of meaning. Later, after Eleanor had gone to sleep, Samantha scanned the documents and placed the originals back into the music box. She wrote a brief letter of her own, tucked it beside Margaret's notes, and locked the box away. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she knew one thing. It would never again be hidden out of shame. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt honest. And that, Samantha realized, might be even more powerful. The morning light filtered gently through the lace curtains of the dining room, catching dust motes that danced like spirits rising. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her posture straighter than usual, a quiet gravity about her that Samantha had never quite seen before. Her eyes were not sorrowful anymore. They were steady, filled with something that resembled peace but held a faint glimmer of something deeper, release. The letter from Margaret rested beside her, the edges slightly curled now, having been read and reread through the night. Samantha had barely slept. Her thoughts had churned with all she had learned and all that remained unresolved. Yet somehow, the house felt changed. The usual creaks and groans of its old bones no longer struck her as ominous. They felt like breath, slow, measured, real. The truth had seeped into its walls, and in doing so, the weight it once carried had begun to lift. After breakfast, Eleanor rose without prompting and asked Samantha to help her into the garden. The air was crisp but clear, and the sun offered reluctant warmth. They walked slowly across the lawn, past the hedges that had grown wild in recent years, until they reached a patch of earth that Margaret had once mentioned in her diary, a place near the lilac trees, where she said she used to go when the house became too loud with silence. "I think this is the spot," Eleanor said quietly, glancing around. She used to sit here, said the wind always sounded like music when it came through the branches. Samantha nodded. She had brought a small tree from the nursery that morning, a slender cherry blossom, not yet in bloom. With Eleanor's guidance, she planted it in silence. No speeches, no prayers, just the quiet rhythm of shovel to earth, the grounding press of roots finding home. When it was done, Eleanor stepped forward and placed a folded letter into the soil just beneath the tree's base. Not to bury it, she had said, but to plant it, to let something grow from truth instead of shame. They stood together for a long while, watching the leaves move gently in the breeze. Then, without looking back, Eleanor turned to Samantha and said, "It's time I left." Samantha didn't argue. She had known it was coming. There was nothing left tethering Eleanor to the house now. Her presence had been for closure, for remembering, for one final thread between past and present. That thread had been cut, not with pain, but with grace. "You're welcome here any time," Samantha said, her voice thick despite her best efforts. "I know," Eleanor replied, her smile soft, "but I won't be back. This house isn't mine anymore. It never really was." Samantha helped her pack that afternoon. Eleanor didn't have much, just a small suitcase, the letter from Margaret, and the music box, which she took without opening again. She paused at the doorway of the library before leaving, running her hand gently along the side of the old bookshelf. "This house used to hold its breath," she said. "Now it breathes again." When the taxi pulled up, Samantha walked her to the car. They embraced, not as employer and housekeeper, but as women bound by a story neither had asked for, yet both had chosen honor. Eleanor looked back once before getting in, eyes settling on the tree in the distance. "She would have liked you," she said simply. As the car disappeared down the gravel drive, Samantha felt the quiet settle around her, but it wasn't empty. It was full of presence, the kind that lingers not in haunting, but in memory. Over the next week, Samantha returned to her work, her routines, the slow reclaiming of her life. But nothing felt quite the same. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and retreat, had transformed into something else entirely, into a place of witness, of reckoning, and now of peace. She contacted a local historian and donated digital copies of Margaret's documents. She didn't name names. Most of the individuals were long dead or publicly disgraced. It wasn't about revenge. It was about record, about allowing the truth to exist somewhere outside the walls of the house. The originals remained in her safe, along with the diary. Not hidden, preserved. One afternoon, while sorting through some remaining boxes in the attic, she found a final surprise, a postcard wedged between two old boards. The ink was faded, the paper brittle, but it was addressed to Eleanor, postmarked from a small town in Oregon, dated July of 1971. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Dear Eleanor, I hope you are well. I made it. I have a small apartment, and I'm working under a new name now. It's strange, being someone else, but I carry you with me. Always. I promise to keep writing, even if I never send these, just in case. Love, always, M." Samantha didn't show Eleanor the postcard. There was no need. She had already found her closure. But she placed it gently inside the diary, between the final pages, and returned it to its drawer. Seasons changed. The cherry blossom tree began to sprout new leaves. Each spring, its blooms scattered pale petals across the garden like soft whispers. And every time Samantha passed it, she paused, not just in memory of Margaret or Eleanor, but in acknowledgement of the story that had demanded to be told. Years later, when Samantha gave a tour of the mansion to a group of literature students from a nearby college, one young woman asked about the tree. "It's beautiful," the student said. "Was it always here?" Samantha smiled faintly. "No, it was planted for someone who once lived here, or maybe for someone who never really left." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The house no longer kept secrets. It held them, carefully, honestly, and in doing so, it had given them back to the world, not as warnings, but as quiet acts of grace.